I'm really a novice when it comes to this shit.
Well, I know, but the technology and what you can just do on an iPhone anymore, and I mean, it's, like I say, it's a fully functioning media device. People don't, I mean, and our kids don't even know what life is like without it. And here we've seen, when I started doing, I mean, I've been working on Pro Tools, which is the audio program I work on, and that's kind of like the industry standard, although now they're alienating a lot of their main users because it's gone all cloud-based. And guys that are doing, I got a guy that's mixing the Grand Rapids Symphony with 100 tracks on a cloud-based program, and it's lagging, and he's like, it's not acceptable. And so I'm at a quandary right now. I need to upgrade. Well, to upgrade to my current Pro Tools, it goes to cloud-based. And all my gearheads are telling me they're all going to a different program because they don't want to be on the cloud, just because of the lagging. Because these files just get to be ginormous. Yeah. And when you mix 100 tracks down to 2, it just takes an immense amount of compute. Even my little show to mix. The one thing I can, when I'm working on my show, the only thing I can't be doing something else at the same time is when it's running out, because and I got a juicy computer and it just takes, it's just huge files. There's where the line is like just like this. I mean, you could spend $1,000 on a rig, or you could spend $100,000 on a rig. And where do you want to be? And at what point do people even know the difference? That's the thing about all this online. I mean, doing video, I mean, were just cardinal rules of video, and now it's like anything goes. Because you can just stick a camera in somebody's face, and it's just the content. It's not the quality, And it's a lot more forgiving. I mean, God, used to be like you had to be a perfectionist about. I mean, and really anything going on broadcast, you're not going to put something out that's not perfect. Is what it is. But
yeah. Well, I mean, and I think this format is a little bit more lenient.
Well, it is. And it's, people, it's on demand. It's just a selective, growing up in radio, I mean, everything was live, dude. There was no computer for nothing.
Dude,
I mean,
every single,
when I train people in radio, I train people to be thinking 3 minutes ahead, because if you're thinking in the moment, you're screwed. Because when something goes wrong, you got no time to react. And you always had to have a plan B, because you get back to. I used to run a live radio show and a Detroit Tigers game at the same time, like as a 15-year-old kid.
Yeah, let's talk about how you guys started. This is really part of the, because you got, first of all, I mean, with Michigan
Are we
Rocks
rolling?
Radio, this is we're full on, and dude.
Had no idea.
Yeah. Because you're developing even a new audience right now.
Sure.
So there's a bunch of people out there that are probably listening to Michigan Rocks Radio that are listening to you for the first time. This episode is brought to you by Chapo's Northside Bar, voted best burger and wings in town. Yeah, you heard that right. If you're going to go out for a burger or wings or both, you might as well go to the place that's voted the best. The best. Why wouldn't you have anything less? Look, and if you're not down for a burger or wings, that's cool. They've got salads, wraps, and sandwiches also. And this summer, it's going to get wild, because on June 24th, it kicks off their summer concert series in the parking lot. Live music, folks. And guess what? It's free. Yeah. Come down for the music, stay for the fun, enjoy the best burger and wings in town. Chapo's Northside Bar. This episode is brought to you by Brandon Ball, broker-owner of Dwelling Realty in Manistee, Michigan. Listen, are you looking to sell your home? Then look no further. When you list with Brandon Ball, you'll get a trusted advisor who will guide you through the entire selling process. With extensive knowledge of the local market, he'll help you price your home competitively to attract the right buyers. And with proven market strategies, your home will be seen by the most qualified buyers. With his 17 years in the business, you'll have someone who's experienced and on your side. Contact Brandon today to get started selling your home. 231-690-4981 or Brandon at dwellingrealty.com.
And people that listen to me, because like I said, I started this at 15. So how did I get started?
Yep.
So I was a young kid playing drums with a couple college guys, Kenny Cott and Don Wayberg, and I needed to learn a song called, and this is a true story, I needed to learn a song called Nutbush City Limits by Bob Seger. Nobody had that record. Well, back to radio, Pete Nesky was, legendary morning guy in town for, ever. Everybody listened to Pete Nesky in the morning. Well, back in 7th, 8th grade, you'd go in and do the menus for the week. Go and record the menus. Well,
lunch menus?
Yeah, you'd go in, a group of kids would go down, and you'd go on and you'd go in the studio with Bernie Schroeder, and you would read, "Hi, my name's Mark, and Tuesday is mac and cheese," and and so when you listen, you knew what lunch was going to be that day. I mean, it was local radio. It's what you did. Well, I had gotten into forensics. Dave Hendricks, he's since passed. He was our English teacher, and he required us in our freshman year, because he was the forensics coach. He was trying to cultivate his team for forensics. Well, one of the categories in forensics was radio news. And how that worked is you got a pile of UPI or AP copy, and you had 30 minutes to compile a newscast that timed out between, you had like a 15-second window that you had to hit, which is, again, back to the live thing. You don't have 4 minutes and 29 or 58 or whatever. It has to be on the nut, because you were always having to hit that network break at the top of the hour, and that was imperative that you hit the legal ID and the network break at the top of the hour. So that was a part of training. Well, anyways, I did very well. I got like third in the state, and it came very natural to me. So I went up, I called Pete Neske. I said, "Hey, I was in 10th grade. And I said, I'm playing drums with this band, and I need to borrow a record or make a tape of it." And he says, "Yeah, come on up." And I kind of jokingly, when I went up, said, "Hey, when are you going to give me a job?" He says, "When do you want to start?" And the rest is history. And all through high school, there were, on one hand, I could count the number of weekends all through high school that I didn't work Saturday nights and shut the station off. We used to go off at 1 a.m., play the national anthem, say this completes our broadcast day, and we'd shut down, and then I would turn around and come back and sign the station on. I mean, I'm a licensed FCC operator at 15 with a tremendous amount of responsibility, and I'd come in at 6 a.m. I'd shut down at 1. I'd be back in there at 6 a.m. I'd have to call city police, state police, sheriff, fire department, Coast Guard, see if there was any news. This is all before I turned the station on at 7 o'clock. I'd have to have a newscast ready to go at 7 o'clock, and I did it. You'd come in, the UPI and United Press and AP wire there'd be a pile of paper on the floor, because it was a teletype. It just ran constantly. Oh, shit. And so you'd come in, there'd be a whole pile. You'd have to go through that. You get the sports scores. You do obituaries. I learned how I can pronounce every Polish name in this town, because let me tell you, if you pronounced it wrong, the phone rang.
Oh, I'm sure.
And I could call Bernie anytime. If I could always call Bernie at home. You'd never pronounce the name wrong, call Bernie, and he'll tell you how to pronounce it properly. So, Bernie, if you're out there, God bless you, because he, again, one of my mentors. The guy's an absolute legend. And so I did that all through high school, and so it just always became very natural to me. Well, then, after high school, and I really had a passion for it, and I had a passion for new music, and that was the cool thing about being on at night. It was freeform radio, so you were in a format, but you were programming a show, and every event was live. I mean, you're back queuing records, and
the whole thing was live.
Everything was live. And then, like I said earlier, I'd be running a Tigers game or a Lions football game, listening in one ear, literally reading the weather forecast in one ear, and listening for the break in the other ear, so you could fire a what we call a cart machine, which all our commercials were on these carts, and they're endless loops, quarter-inch tape, and basically when you put something on there, it would put a sub-audible tone that we can't hear, but the machine could sense. So it would run, usually on a 60-second cart, there'd be 70 seconds of tape. So the commercial would run, and that 10 seconds would spool out, and the machine would know where that tone was, and that's where it'd stop. So the next time you push go, the beginning. But if there were 5 commercials in a break, you had 5 carts. So every hour you would have your carts all stacked up, literally like 8-track tape cartridges. And usually, the station would have like 4 to 8 machines. The bigger stations in Grand Rapids had banks of them, so you could be, and every bank on the board, you had a switch on the board. Whereas here you were like, contorting sometimes, pushing a button with your foot, whatever you had to do. But it was phenomenal training. And so I ended up getting a job at 19 as the afternoon drive guy on K106 in Ludington, and I was the music director. And I got hired, a guy by the name of Roger Beatty hired me. He was the program director, and Rod Beckman was my landlord. I lived at 406 Ferry Street above Rod Beckman's house. I'm 19, and got down there, and it was really cool, because any places I learned when I worked is that if you've got talented people, you have to let those talented people. And radio, in its day, was one of the more creative industries that you could be in. I mean, theater of the mind, right? Morning shows. I mean, think about what these morning shows do to generate content, hours of content. And back then, there was no internet, dude. You didn't just go look something up. You had to have your nose in a magazine or a trade journal or a newspaper, because you didn't just go online. I mean, my goodness, the time I can put information together now, I mean, it's just, you can't even compare it. So I got hired down in Ludington. I was working in the afternoons, and they said, you're going to be our music director. Well, back in the day, the major trade magazine was called Radio and Records. And if you were a reporting station to Radio and Records, meaning that your playlist weighed in on the charts, if you will, you got what was called full service from the record companies, which meaning everything that came out, anything that the big stations were getting, we were getting. Well, I was able to get WKLA in Ludington to become a P3 reporting station on the adult contemporary charts. So, I had to, I don't know if there must have been, I think we had faxes. I think we had a fax machine back, because I'm pretty sure that's pretty much how we did all that stuff, was over fax back in the day. And about 6 months in, Roger took a job in Detroit and recommended me to be the program director. So at 20 years old, I was a program director, and did that for 2 years, and kind of got to the point where radio was, you bounced around, you start small, just like television. You go from Ludington to Lansing to Chicago, and then you're there. And I had an opportunity in Lansing. I had an opportunity in South Bend, Indiana, to go to be on a rock station, because that's what I wanted to do. Had a great audition tape. Wasn't even worried about that. It's just a matter of fitting in with where you were going to go. And just decided that I wanted to go to college. So that's at 22, started a 5-year marketing degree at Ferris. And for the first couple weeks or years, I came home and continued working at WKLA. And along the way, actually back in high school, and this is another great part of the story, is there was a huge morning guy in Grand Rapids that went on to Chicago. He's a legend. His name's Kevin Matthews. Well, Kevin, I mean, he was on GRD. He went to Chicago, was on WLS. He's been WLAV. I mean, the guy, he's nominated for the Radio Hall of Fame this year. Great dude. Well, his sister is Jamie Robertson from Manistee, who was friends with my mom. And my mom mentioned something to Jamie, and the next thing you know, and I was 16, because I drove myself down to Grand Rapids. I got to go shadow Kevin Matthews for the day. And people I met that day were people that I would end up working with, because when I went there, I'm like, man, if I could ever work at LAV, that would be like, because as a kid, I used to have my cable plugged into my FM receiver, and I could get LAV out of Grand Rapids, and I could get QFM out of Milwaukee. And these were album rock stations, and that's playing new music and exposing new bands is something that I've always just been, kind of passionate about, and having a format to do that, because not very many people have that format. So lo and behold, I get a job working at Z's in downtown Grand Rapids, going to college, coming down on the weekends to bartend and make money to get myself through college. Was there about 2 weeks, and happened to meet a guy by the name of Red Noise. Another guy, used to see him on the Freedom Rock commercials. He was the program director at LAV. Hey man, working down here on the weekends. I got a great tape. The very next Sunday, I did an overnight shift on LAV. And,
So when you I don't mean to cut you off, the tape situation, it's almost like, giving a headshot to somebody. So what did you do? You just recorded yourself?
So any station would have a mechanism to, because it's just called an air check. So as a program director, I would air check my jocks so that you could critique them and coach them and make them better on-air people. So most places I worked required you to submit an air check to your program director so that he could kind of be your coach. So you would just take kind of your best of your best, and, that would be put on a cassette tape, and you would put a resume and a headshot and all that stuff together. But yeah, so that's what it was. So started working at LAV, and it's like, pinch myself. And again, you're going in, if you went on, I started doing overnight. So if I'd go on at midnight, I'd go in 10 o'clock, because I've got to pull all my commercials, which were still all on cart. I was playing CDs at that time, so occasionally you play a vinyl, but by then at LAV everything was over to CDs. But you were actually programming your show. You were producing your show, and most stations would have what they call a music wheel. So within a category, at a specific time of the hour, you are playing a song from this category, but you're picking the artist, you're picking the song, and then every segue is mechanical. I mean, there's no, I'm going to, put the computer on and read a magazine. I mean,
you're producing your own show, and like you just said, they have a category. You got to pick a song from that category. So if you've got a monster show,
right,
you could have artists hitting you up like, "Hey man, could you please play my shit?"
Well, and that happens all the time, and you had to be very cautious of that. And that, we'll talk a little bit more of that as we kind of transition into how I got to be doing what I'm doing. So I always enjoyed specialty shows. There was a show on in Grand Rapids called Jazz Brunch. It's still on LAV on Sundays. Good friend of mine, Steve Aldridge, has done a show called Clam Bake, which was always like import and new stuff. Well, I got connected up. There was a show called Roots Rock and Reggae that they had just put on. And I got connected to be this producer of this show because it happened to be on Sunday nights when my schedule was on. So I would work an afternoon shift on Sunday, and then there'd be some specialty programs that I would run. There was a show called Out of Order, which was a top 30 countdown that wasn't in order of the, that was kind of cool. And then Clam Bake would come on, and then Roots Rock and Reggae would come on. Well, Edward Taylor Klein, also known as the Rasta Man Nane, one of the largest character personalities I've ever met in my career. This guy was from Sierra Leone, Africa, and he was positioned himself as the Rasta Man. And he had started this international organization called Reggae Ambassadors Worldwide, and was literally connected with, the Marleys and Peter Tosh and Bunny Wailer and all these guys that are legends. And I became like his sidekick for 3 years producing this show. And he had a guy that lived like literally around the corner. I lived in Heritage Hill in Grand Rapids. This guy lived around the corner from me. He had like a 25,000 reggae and world music CD collection. Well, I had a standing appointment with that guy every week. I had a 40-pack CD case, and I had access to his full library. So he would turn me on, and then I would bring and produce the show, and Rasta Man was just the voice of it. But it was 100% live, and we would take, you're on WLAV, you're covering all the way from Muskegon to Lansing to Kalamazoo. At any time there's 50,000 people listening to your radio station, and it is what it is. But we would have like 6 phones ringing at 11 o'clock on a Sunday night, just constantly. So we did that for a couple of years, and ended up graduating from college, and actually kind of the people you meet. So I took a gap year after college and saved up because I had to do this backpack around Europe trip thing before I settled down. So, and I loved what I was doing. I was tending bar, and I was working at LAV, and I was backstage at all the concerts and meeting all the artists. And for a 27-year-old kid with no commitments, that was a pretty good place to be. So as I was leaving on this trip to Europe, I had to kind of pass my reggae show off for somebody. So I had an intern. His name was Ron Kloss, and he's now vice president for Live Nation. He ran the Alice Cooper show at Pine Knob last night. So it's pretty neat the people you meet and where they end up, So Ron was my guy, and when I came back, I just kept, I took it right back over, and then said, okay, well, I got the degree. It's time to get the job. And I actually tried to get hired by the West Michigan Whitecaps, and I didn't. They were hiring their very first marketing director. This is 30 years ago, and didn't get it, and went to work at Wood Radio, and I was hired as creative services director.
That's in Grand Rapids, right?
And back then, this is before all the so it used to be you could only the government only allowed to own one FM and one AM station, and then in the mid '80s it started getting deregulated, and you could own 2. You had 2 FMs and 2 AMs. Now it's there isn't a limit. But back then, we were one of the first stations to kind of consolidate. And little known fact, so most radio stations, the most they can be licensed at is 100,000 watts, which is a big coverage area. Grand Rapids has 2 of 7 radio stations in the country that are licensed above 100,000 watts, and that's B93, which is the most powerful station at 320,000 watts. If you ever notice, you can listen to B93 like all the way into suburban Chicago because it's just a monster. And then Wood FM, which is 105.7, and that's at 265,000 watts. the same guy on both of those stations.
Oh, nice.
And that's who I'm going to work for. So basically my job was to work with all of the non-agency customers to create their radio campaigns. And my office was a studio. I had my own studio. And, I got to meet just some amazing people that I'm still friends with today. I mean, it goes back. And one day I'm working in the studio, and the program director comes in. He said, I want you to meet Ray Bentley. He's our new sports director. That's just this hulk of a man. So we start talking to him. I have no idea who this guy is, Yeah. Stan tells him, the program director says, teach him the technical side of it. So I said, all right, Ray, I'm Mark. Nice to meet you. I'm like, what's your story? Well, I'm retired NFL linebacker. I played in 2 Super Bowls, and he's got the AFC Championship ring on from the Buffalo Bills, and I said, well, what are you going to do? So I'm going to be an analyst on Fox Sports. And sure enough, he was. He did pro games, and now he's one of their lead college guys. He's moved back out to Buffalo. But, again, I worked. I always tease him that I taught him everything he knew, because he literally knew. He was
those guys got to start
as
somewhere.
Green as could be. He came in and cut off shorts and a bandana, and I would learn later that it's Dr. Fuller's first cousin. I would learn her name is Marion Bentley Fuller.
Yeah, they
are first cousins. So it's weird. And I could go on. I mean, I digress. But worked at Wood Radio for 2 years, and I started doing a bunch of freelance work at an agency called J.W. Messner. And another guy that I would meet that lives on Portage Lake, Jim Messner. And they used to be a Tier 1 agency for GM. And they were one of 3 agencies that were essentially licensed to produce ads for the dealer group. So like if you see the Northern Michigan Chevy dealers, and it's 12 dealers, their agency would place those nationwide, and they had like 4,500 car dealers. Okay. Well, a guy that I worked with at LAV had moved on to J.W. Messner, and I could go there and do voiceover after work and make more in a night than I was making in a week. So it's like, this is kind of a no-brainer. I can freelance. I mean, if the freelance work is coming in. And so that's when I started MS Creative and kind of went out on my own. And that was 1994. So I was doing that, and I could hear WGRD, which was a classic, or a CHR top 40 station, 98 Rock. I could hear them going in a very drastic direction towards alternative music, which was just kind of coming on the scene, the pre-grunge era. And I could really hear him changing the direction of the radio station. And then they changed the logo, and they went away from the 98 GRD and they went to the 97.9 GRD, which they still have to this day. That logo's almost 30 years old, but it works.
Yeah.
And I'm like, man, I got to get something going with these guys. And I don't know what it is, but I got to get something going. So I poked around a little bit. Well, it turns out Joel Schaff, who was the general manager at LAV when I was there, who I did not burn a bridge. That's one, kids, if you're listening out there, never burn a bridge.
Yeah.
Never, ever, ever burn a bridge. And I called up Joel, and I said, hey, let's have lunch. I got an idea I want to run by you. So took him to Rose's in East Grand Rapids and, said, hey, I've got this idea for this show. That's a local music show called, we're going to call it Radioactive. Well, the Verve Pipe was just on the verge of getting signed, and there was a bunch of attention, all kinds of A&R reps in the Grand Rapids market looking for bands and whatnot. And 2 weeks after that lunch date, my show debuted on GRD, and it ran for 6 years. I had Sunday nights. Kind of created a neat niche there because I never was actually their employee. I was just a 1099 contractor.
Were you doing everything out of the MS?
MS Creative with GRD, and my trade-off is I had use of the studio from 6 to 10 every morning, so I could do all my own production without having to pay studio time. And then the other deal was they had a production manager who was Dan Clark, the best in the business, and he had a pretty nice vacation package. So part of my deal was the 5 or 6 weeks that Dan was off, I would come in and be the full-time production manager, and I'd get paid X to do that. Well, then I started doing all these projects for the station, like internal marketing project and mailers and their billboard campaigns. And we would work a lot of times with the record companies on joint promotions. Actually got, on 2 occasions, tried to get hired by two of the record companies wanted to hire me. GRD wanted me the program director. I'm like, I just gotten this big account.
Yeah.
I'm like, man, you're offering my dream job when I don't really need it. But that I always kept a toe in it. And you talk about having access and people wanting you to play their songs. And when you're doing a local music show, and what we created there was really cool. So at that time, the guy that hired me at GRD, his name is Alex Terr. And Alex was in Charlevoix, and then he went to Detroit, or Grand Rapids, and then he went to Detroit. And now Alex is a program director for SiriusXM and programs 9 SiriusXM channels out of Miami, Florida. He was the guy that hired me at GRD. And basically, that team, that's when they went and hired Rick Beckett away from KLQ. And Rick Beckett had a 40 share, which meant that according to Arbitron ratings, which were the accepted measurement of the day, 4 in 10 radios were on Rick Beckett's show in the morning. I mean, they would cume 150,000 listeners on an average morning. Well, for whatever reason, Rick Beckett took a shine to me, and I'd be in there a lot in the mornings, and I stayed out of his way, and that's what he liked. But he would pull me in, and so I literally had a 1-hour show on the radio station a week, literally, and my promo would run, just like here on the Eagle. People thought I was one of the main DJs, and I don't even work there, So, but what we did is we started this thing called the Tuesday Night Music Club, and it really got bigger than anybody could imagine. We were drawing 1,000 to 1,200 people out in the basement of a bowling alley in a banquet center out in Standale, Michigan at Sluggo's. And we'd have 7 to 10 bands on 3 stages, and I would MC that, and we would do live remotes back to the station and whatnot. And I mean, it was crazy for like 4 or 5 years.
How much fun
it was, and I got to know all the bands. I mean, and to this day, that was a big part of my, I guess my past. And when you have a passion for something, it doesn't just go away. You just miss it. Well, fast forward, and with podcasting and everything that's going on, and we'll talk a little bit about that, in a minute. But I have this idea, I got to bring something back. And I kept thinking, one of the limitations from a marketing standpoint with the local music show, and even though you have Grand Rapids and Lansing and Kalamazoo, it's still local. Well, man, if I could create something and beyond throughout Michigan and really create a niche and a destination and a brand, because my Michigan Rocks Radio, but you're starting from zero. And so Karen and I had been talking, man, I either got to do something with this or I just need to forget about it, because I'm thinking about it. This was going on for like a couple years. It's like, how can I take this passion and this talent I have and put it to use outside of my, day job?
Yeah.
Because I still have that too.
Yeah.
So it was a very weird intervention. Brian Hollenbaugh, the owner of the station, called me up to take me out to lunch. And I was just expecting him, as a station owner to, try to build a bridge to me for my agency to place ads for my clients on his radio station. Yeah, I'll have lunch with you. We were acquainted. Let's have lunch. So we had lunch, and one thing kind of led to another, and he offered me this position to kind of get involved in running the station. I'm like, well, dude, I've got my own business, and I've got some very, very loyal clients that are very important to me, and I've got 2 kids in college. I'm not anywhere close to retiring, although it sounds great. I'm not. We're not there yet. And he said, no. He said it'll be an easy lift for you. He says I've done my background on you, and he said I don't care how much time you put into it. I just care what the results are. And I'm like, And I said, well, let me talk to my wife and let me give that some consideration, and maybe the next meeting includes her, because it obviously would.
Sure.
We do everything as partners, and I'm not going to make any commitments to anybody without her being at the table. And I said, how about this idea? And I had this idea for the Michigan Rocks radio show, and I said, how about if I put a pilot show together for you? And it'll just kind of, I'll just make it for you, but, envision. And I said, I'll write you a little brief on what my goal is. Well, I put that pilot show together, and he was just blown away. He was like, this is so cool. So the first show went on April 1st of 2022. And it's a process to produce every show. You don't just, not to diminish what we're doing, but we're sitting down and chatting, right?
Yeah.
I've got to put my playlist together, which is the essence of the show, because ultimately it's not about me, it's about the music. That's what I've always said. I've just been the guy that has a platform to play that music, and I've always looked at that as kind of a privilege, because it is a passion, and I have an outlet for that passion, and nobody's doing exactly what I'm doing. So that's kind of the cool thing. Well, so I put my music together, and I put that all together in Spotify, because I have every band. Now, there's stuff that falls outside of that I can plug in, but I have access to everything. The downside is it's no drag and drop. I have to physically, play that in to Pro Tools. And then I have to hit an exact number, because we're back on linear radio. So my show has to be exactly 49 minutes. Well, my band interviews are going to vary every week. Because I do the studio conversation, and that's been a lot of fun. Another great story. So these bands are all over. I mean, since I started the show, I've played over 200 bands on my show from Michigan. People don't, and even myself, I'm still discovering bands that I didn't know. Who did I hear the other day? Brownsville Station. Had no idea they were from Michigan. Smoking in the boys' room. Yeah,
no shit.
Had no idea they were a Michigan band. And here I'm supposed to be the expert, you know. So that's been really the fun part and then the up and coming bands, and that's really been my passion. And we have so many bands that have relocated to Nashville from Michigan that are just, on the cusp of doing this. But I want to digress to the one story. So for my 1 year show, I had Pop Evil. These guys are international. They've sold 20 million records. Well, Lee Kakati used to be a banquet waiter at Wallenwood Springs Country Club when he was in college, all right? His band was called 10-5. And I remember when they changed their name. Well, I'm like, I'm going to get Lee for my 1 year anniversary show. So track him down through a mutual friend, and he called me right back, and we spent like an hour and a half talking before we even did our interview. And not in the interview, but one of the takeaways from that conversation was, dude, you were the first person to ever play my music on the radio. And he said, I'll never forget that. He said, if you ever need anything, you ever want to come to a show, you let me know what you need. He said, anytime you want to do an interview, he says, don't call my manager, just call me direct. And and he remembered that from almost 30 years ago that I was the first guy to play his music on the radio. Well, that's powerful. Yeah. Now the guy's an international rock star. But he's still just Lee to me, because I knew him when he was a kid. So, but fun stuff like that. So, we're really just getting started with the show. I think this past week was my 75th show. Most people that I've talked to that are encouraging me have said that 90% of everybody would have given up by now. My goal is to be statewide. It will happen. The challenge is the reason that I'm not that I got out of corporate radio is exactly what I'm dealing with right now. You've got 4 entities that own 90% of the stations in the major markets. Generally, it's a program director that might be in charge of 4 stations. I compare it to being nothing against McDonald's managers, but they have a formula, and they're basically to do the formula. So this guy with this 1 hour specialty show really has to find somebody, and the people that have picked it up or are considering picking it up get it. And they're all independent operators. To the person. My guy up in Tim Ellis up in the Sioux that runs it, he's an independent guy, owns the station, does mornings. Had the same reaction Brian had. He's like, this is cool. This is going on my radio station next week.
So how does that work? So you're doing this with Brian.
Yep. So Michigan Rocks Radio is mine. So basically, Brian just gives me that hour of airtime. And ultimately, how it would pay for itself is my sponsors would fall inside that 49 minutes, just like any other like American Top 40 or any countdown show, Nina Hartwell, the New Wave Nation, any of those things are produced the exact same way. You've got segments that fit within a half hour of more or less, and then there's commercials contained within the syndicated programming, and then there's room for the local. So if I provide you the radio station with a 49-minute content, you have 11 minutes of local content. That can be ads, it can be news, it can be weather, whatever your format dictates. So I just mix everything, gets mixed down to MP3s and Dropboxed out. I send them out on Tuesday mornings, always a couple weeks ahead. Band interviews. I have Vinny from Sponge this week.
That's gnarly.
I had Wally Palmer from the Romantics. I've got Tommy James from Tommy James and the Shondells scheduled. I've got David from Rhythm Corps. I'm talking to him this afternoon. they're playing their first show in 25 years. Scotty Mac's going to be in the front row.
Of course he is.
So it's been a lot of fun, kind of reigniting that passion. And like I told my wife when I did this, it's like if I don't make this commitment and I don't start producing this show, then I'm still just talking about it. And once you make that commitment to, have that content, but, if I'm going on vacation or something, it never goes away. So I might have to get a couple shows in the can. The promise I made to Karen is I don't really work on it during my business day. I've always been an early riser because of the days at GRD. I'd have to get up in the morning, put a hat on, and go in and do my production. That's the beautiful thing about radio is you don't have to be very pretty. Yeah. So, obviously. But that habit kind of has stuck with me, and a lot of times I'll just get up, grab my coffee, go down and get in the studio. The phone's not ringing. My voice is fresh. I can get in there and get my voiceovers done, and then work on putting things together as I have time to do. But I've got it down. That pilot probably took me 8 hours to produce, and I've got it down to about maybe 2.5 now. And it is what it is. It takes time.
Yeah.
And if it was easy, then there'd be 10 shows just like it. And there are a few other stations trying to do like local regional shows, but nobody is really doing the full span. And I mean, it's so cool to play like a Rare Earth song next to something brand new, and it works. Or if I play Drew Hale next to Bob Seger, now Drew Hale is a peer of Bob Seger's on the radio. Or if I play the Accidentals next to, Red Hot Chili Peppers or whatever. Yeah. And that's the fun part of it. But the hard part is if I was playing all emerging bands, they would sign me over and let me podcast that stuff. But I want to mix the known bands in. So the radio station allows me license to do that, whereas I can't just blast that stuff out. My playlist can be on Spotify, but they won't let me put my content on there. So
what about just doing what we're doing?
Right. Well, that's the thing that I'm going to...
I think that'd be fucking rad. Well, I would love your stories, the way that you can interact with people, and these bands, people want to hear that. That's 45 minutes of chatter.
That's kind of the next step. And I've already talked about this. I've got a mentor. His name is Phil Tower. He's a radio guy in Grand Rapids, and he's been on the kind of the ground floor of national podcasting through iHeart. Like he did the whole Rush Limbaugh retrospective podcast. I mean, Phil's been a mentor and cheerleader of mine forever. And I actually did a pilot show with Seth Bernard just as you spoke. So it becomes a time thing. And I feel like I need to monetize kind of what I have going now, and that's like phase 2. What I am working on, I'm actually working on it right now, is I'm going to go back and take all of my existing studio conversations. I'm going to mix those out without music, and those can live right on my webpage and on Spotify, because again, that content is not protected, whereas the music publishing is. So again, it just takes time to go in and physically mix that stuff out and get it posted. And again, this is truly a side hustle.
Yeah.
So, it is what it is. But it's coming, and as the bands, probably my biggest fans and cheerleaders are the bands. As far as my interactions on social media, the bands, anytime somebody calls you out of the blue and says, "Hey, I want to put you on the radio," they're all for it, because that just there's still radio it's an old terrestrial traditional media, but there's still a ton of people in radio stations are successful that serve their local audience. And if you look at what the Eagle does, I mean, we're doing it. And that's really what Brian brought me on for. He doesn't live in Manistee, and he needed somebody here that, cared as much about the station as I do. And again, like any good operation I've worked at, he puts talented people in place, and he lets them do their thing. And the guys we have, Scotty Mac is he's a gem.
Yeah.
People love him. He's as salt of the earth
Super
and down to earth guy as you could want. What you're listening to, that's Scotty Mac, and he's passionate. Mike Reeling, our afternoon guy, same thing. I mean, he's brilliant. I mean, he could work anywhere he wants, and Brian has him working for him. And that's the fun part about it, because it's not about me. It's about the music. It's about the people. In relation to the radio station, it's about the community. And our sponsors tell it best. I mean, the station just had probably the best month it's had ever, and it's because of our sponsors. And people won't continue to spend money on advertising if they don't think it's working. So,
right.
that's kind of where it's at.
I always envision like what was that TV show WKLA in Cincinnati or
WKRP.
WKRP.
You know,
was it ever really like that?
You know, the stereotypes are. It really, that part of it was brilliant because every station, you know, the egos, the people that you deal with, the egos, and then the people that take on different names, because a lot of people on the big stations don't. I just always use my real name because I'm just who I am.
Yeah.
But there's guys I know well that sometimes I have to think, you know, okay, do I call you Scott or do I call you Steve? Because, you know, and your real name is this, but your radio name is this. But almost to the person, those stereotypes, those cast, it's a very, and you dealt with some people that were really out there. I mean,
I'm sure.
Really out there. But then, you know, it's interesting. There's an up and coming artist. His name is Myron Elkins, and I've had him on my show twice. He was a 20-year-old welder from Otsego, Michigan, and he's an old soul. You hear this kid sing and you're like, you know, he sounds like Chris Stapleton, and he's 21 years old. Well, he's been signed to Sony Records. He's got a 4-record deal.
Wow.
Touring the country, opening for Marcus King. He just headlined the Sunday night at Hoxeyville. And again, I was the first person to interview this guy, first person to play his stuff on the radio, and a very good friend of mine is his manager. So they were playing at Coyote Crossing over in Cadillac this summer, and we have a cottage out at Sand Lake. So I said, we gotta go over and meet this kid, and it'd be good to see Josh, his manager, and whatnot. So we went over and got a chance to have a nice chat with him, and we were just talking, and you know, and here's this 21-year-old kid sing. So growing up for me, and you to a point, you're a little younger than me, but we're kind of out of the same, you know, the 1900s, like I tell my kids. You know, we connected with radio people, DJs, whatever you want to call them, on-air people. You know, Pete Nesky, Bernie Schroeder. These people were there every day. They were snow, wind, rain. They were always there. They were a constant, and you depended and relied on them to get your information. That's where you got it. Well, like talking to Myron, who's 21 years old and an emerging superstar, he has no connections with DJs because his whole, like we were talking about right back at the beginning, our kids don't know what it's like to not have this technology, not have everything at their fingertips or in their pocket, you know. And he said, it's so cool that what I'm doing is exposing music in a way that he would not otherwise have that opportunity to be exposed. And as far as he's concerned, if one person listened to my show and went and liked him on social media, it's all that matters to him. He's winning, you know. And check him out, Myron Elkins. I mean, he's just fantastic. I mean, he's got a couple tunes that just stick in your head. And then you go see him live, and he's, you know, under the tutelage of Sony Records, so there's a formula. Well, his first set is like he just plays the record. I mean, because he's doing a lot of showcases, or if he has an opening gig, he's only got, you know, maybe 30, 40 minutes to go out. So it's, you got to make the most bang for your buck, and you got to play the hits that you're trying to get to stick to the wall. His second set, they have 3 guitars. In his second set, they just, you know, kind of open it up a little bit, and it's kind of like a Tom Petty, Wallflowers kind of groove, and they were just fantastic. But this kid, keep your eye on him. He's the next big thing out of Michigan, Myron Elkins. You heard it here first.
You heard it here first. Well, you heard it on your show first.
Yeah, you heard it here second.
Michigan Rocks.
Right.
But there's just a couple of little things I just wanted to pick your brain about. Well, you've kind of already answered it, but is it easier because of the technology today to produce your show than it was when you first started?
Oh, there's no question. Going back to TV commercials, and this is, I mean, I've produced... I don't know how many TV commercials I produced. A lot, hundreds and hundreds. So back in the day, we would shoot. I say back in the day, I'm sounding old, but I'm talking about, you know, this is 93, 94, 95. State of the art was Sony Betacam, you know, $40,000 camera with a beta, not the betas that you would play at home, but a commercial broadcast grade beta tape that only was a beta tape. And actually, prior to that was 3/4 inch, but that didn't last long. But went to beta tape, and the advent of digital editing. So it used to be where you would linear edit, and you would have an editing console with a character generator to create crude graphics and whatnot. But you would literally have 2 what they would call slave decks to play your field footage and you would run it through that console to master it onto a master deck, and then that would be but it would be linear. So you'd have to have, if something was happening, you would be making that event happen. Going to what we started working on, Avid, which was at the time, now your Mac, your iMovie program, back in 1994, the only way to achieve that technology was with $150,000+ Avid proprietary computer system with a ginormous Macintosh to run it. Well, so you go out and you do all your filming on beta, and you'd come in and you'd have to log that footage. So you'd have to go through and you'd have to say, okay, medium shot, whatever. You'd get a time code off the tape, so you knew, what shots you had to use to put your piece together or cut to or whatever. Then all that would have to be loaded in. You're going into Avid now, so it physically gets loaded in. Well, now it's nonlinear editing, so you've got your audio and video tracks in front of you just like you do now, but this is 1995, and you'd spend say maybe you spend the morning editing the spot, putting everything where it needs to be. Well, then, in order to get all those tracks down, you'd have to render it, right? So it has to get rendered down to, a 2-track, basically. So back in those days, there's 30 frames of video in a second. So every time you see a frame of video, standard definition, there's 30 frames per second. So the computer has to process each one of those frames. So if you take 30 frames a second times 30 seconds is 900 frames that has to. Plus, you incorporate audio, motion graphics, transitions. They all take computer space to process. We would, say, spend 4 hours editing and get to a point of rendering and go to lunch, because it would take
forever.
It would take an hour to render a 30-second ad with a state-of-the-art. I mean, that was state-of-the-art. Well, it was just, okay, we're getting it. It was like, what are we having for lunch? Because we knew we were going to have to take that break. And then when you look at long forms, these are, I'm talking 30-second TV ads. We've done a lot of long form video, and you've got, so then, multiply that if it's 5 minutes, and then if you want to make a change, you got to go back and make the change and then let it render out all again. So you spent a lot of time doing other things, writing or making phone calls, because you just had this inherent rendering time. So in that respect, it's way easier. I mean, look what you're producing this on iPhones, and the cameras are just, like I say, people just take for granted that you can just roll this stuff. Well, back in the day, like I say, I look at setting up like a floating shot, and you could spend an hour and a half setting up a jib arm and a crane and counterweights to get this one shot. Well, now you take a little pocket drone out and you can get that shot in 5 minutes, and it's from every angle, and you're shooting it in 4K, and as long as it's lit properly, nobody knows the difference, and it's brilliant. But so the technology and just now we work in Premiere and After Effects, and rendering is instantaneous, undoing a change instantaneous. I can mix that down. I literally, when I started my career, the only way that I could have a client preview a commercial would be to either send them a VHS tape, or I had a 13-inch deck, TV with a VHS deck in it, and I would go wherever in the state my client, because this is the only way you could do it. So I would go wherever my client was. I got a car dealer in Bay City. I got to go to Bay, because this has to be on, it's Wednesday, and this has to start the next Monday, and it's Wednesday of the following week. So here's what would have to happen. I'd have to go and physically play that commercial. It's either approved or we're going to make changes, and you're either going to trust me with the changes, or I got to come back or overnight you a tape to give me approval. But 9 times out of 10, it was approved because you were producing it to a script. So nobody, generally, they were just giving. Half your customers just say, run it, well, I trust you, but the ones especially the car dealers, they're a little picky. And so, but anyways, I might drive, 4 hours round trip to go get that commercial approved. And then, call back to the suite and tell Tony it's approved. And that ad's going to be on 10 stations. So now we would have to physically dub on a Beta SP 5-minute tape, not a 30-minute or 60-minute field tape, but a 5-minute master tape. We're going to dub those ads, or if there's 3 ads that are going to go on there, they would have to have a slate produced, which would be, because nowadays everything's digital. You can just start it right there, whereas back in the day, to put it in the system, you'd have to have a slate with color bars and a countdown, like a 10-second countdown, so that the guy loading that into the system at the station knew when to push the button to load it in. And so we would spend 1 day a week would be spent, because all those tapes have to have labels, 2 labels, a top and a spine. Then they've got to be put in UPS, and you've got to have a UPS label, and they've got to be sent out, and then you have to accommodate for all that time. And I mean, and then, you know, we would spend hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of dollars just on stock tape, you know, regularly, because we had to have that. And then you never got rid of anything, you know, you because that was your archive.
Yeah.
And maybe 5 years from now, I need to go back and pull a shot off of it. And then we gradually transitioned over to, you know, more of digital and the computers and the cameras, and, you know, buy a camera, and in next week it'll be outdated because something cooler will come out.
Tell me about it, dude.
And we've actually gone, my boy Keith and I, a lot of times nowadays we'll just rent the gear that we need, because we can rent the latest greatest for a very little amount of money for like a 7-day rental. We get exactly what we want to work with, and we send it back. And because you can go spend as much as you want, but it's going to be outdated and you're going to be bummed. So it's just the way it is. But so in that respect, things have become way easier, just by virtue of the computer programs and, you know, the processing speeds and whatnot. Technology has made that part of it a lot easier. Researching, doing shows. I mean, it takes me about 30 minutes to write my show, and I write it so that my timing is, you know, but I can, you know, between social media and the internet, what can't you find out in, you know, in 5 minutes? Whereas before, like I said, you research things. I mean, it's just like, I can't imagine writing a paper today, and I know, you know, there's programs that, you know, but so it's only so many words. It can only go together so many ways. And, you know, back, you know, we'd have to go to the library and have our note cards and have our sources, and everything would have to, I mean, I remember, you know, typing papers. And, you know, when I was in college, my statistics class, half of the class was teaching us how to write a program to, you know, digest the data. It was computer because like it basically was doing what Excel does. Excel didn't exist yet. So you had to write a spreadsheet program to be able to compute the data of the survey that you were going out on campus to. It's like, I don't want to be a computer programmer. I want to be a creative guy. But you had to know that side of it. But that's all changed, you know, because everything is just at your fingertips now, you know.
Well, speaking of timing, because this is the one thing, and I know you've probably been asked this a bunch of times or whatever, but like, so usually when I'm listening to the radio, I always catch the one thing where the DJ is telling a story, and they're saying, and then the story starts leading into the song, and it's all instrumental, and then they finish the story at the exact moment the lyrics start. What is up with that?
Okay, well that
I think that's so fresh.
So basically, in the business, that was called hitting the post. Anytime you bring a song onto the station, you're going to provide that. Now, not every format does it. Typically, album rock stations don't talk over the intros. They typically that was a kind of a top 40 thing. But so basically, that's called hitting the post. Well, back in the day when you were doing it live, if you had 17-second intro, then you better. I mean, it was feel. I mean, now you just slide the waveform. And you know, but what it does is it keeps the flow going. In a weird way, it helps you get more music in an hour because you're talking over that part of the song. So you're in it. You know, there is a science to it. There's also an art. That's the cool part about
Brian
it.
Brian does it all the time. I always
and in that, you know, and it's just called hitting the post. And some formats do it, some formats don't. It really is just it's a preference. And he likes people do it, but he wants people to do it effectively. So it either has to be right where the vocals come in, or a lot of songs might have an intro where there's a nice stop and you hit that and boom. But I do it occasionally. It's a feel thing, and it's when you're doing it. I mean, does this work as a as a talk over or not? And that's really all that is.
So I always thought it was like a competition, like who could get closest.
No, you want to hit it. You want to hit it on the nut. I mean, it's called hitting the post, and that's just that's what that is, you know. And again, it's a lot less dramatic than it used to be because you sound like a fool if you miss it.
Yeah.
you know, because you start talking over the song. That's kind of one of those cardinal sins. I'm going to call you out in your critique meeting on your audition tape, James. Don't talk over the music.
Don't talk over the music. Dude, this has been rad.
Yeah.
And I know you've got like way more stories. We're going to have to do this again sometime.
Yeah, it's fun. We've had a lot of fun with it, and you know, I guess I didn't go down the route of bouncing around the country because I loved being in Grand Rapids, and I loved being able to come up here on the weekends. And then when we moved up here in 2001, it was kind of a no-brainer. But no doubt if I would have stuck with it, you know, I've got colleagues I've worked with that are in every top 10 market in the country. I had ins in Chicago. That was literally Karen and I tossed a coin. Start MS Creative, doing what we've been doing for 30 years, or move to Chicago and me get a job at Q101 and her find a graphics job. And that, I have no regrets, but that, you know, that was really our life decision. And, you know, then, you know, living in Manistee has just been a blessing. I mean, I wouldn't have changed anything. My kids are awesome. Great. I always said it's a great place to be from. And if you can figure out a way to pursue your passion and live here, then that's pretty cool stuff. And, you know, here we are.
Thanks, brother.
Yeah, thank you. Appreciate you.
Yeah, let's get you to sign the board, dude.